As a community grows, it develops an individual character that distinguishes it from all other communities on earth. We who live in the community come to think of it as our home and realize that many things help make it home. The shape of the land, the weather, the name of streets, and landmarks, large and small, bridges, buildings, monuments, and parks. Some familiar places survive in spite of changes all around them. They survive thanks to devoted efforts to save them, and sometimes thanks to sheer luck. We will look at some of the landmark survivors in and near Pittsburgh, whose futures are bright at the moment. These landmarks challenge us to consider how other landmarks, deserted or unappreciated today, might be given new uses, so they may become part of our community's life once again. One landmark which has truly survived is the Fort Pitt Blockhouse, located in Point State Park. The blockhouse has survived for more than 230 years, and it is a reminder of Pittsburgh's earliest days as a frontier outpost. After regaining control of the forks of the Ohio from the French in 1758, the British Army began construction of Fort Pitt. By 1761, the point was well protected by the fort. It was the largest and strongest fort in North America. Steve Knuckles, dressed in the uniform of the Royal American Regiment, describes the fort.
This was the largest frontier fort of its time, and as you see some of the shots of the earlier period and maybe some paintings of it, you see that it was a magnificent fort and a magnificent example of an 18th century fort, designed to primarily as a defensive situation, so that if there was a siege by, at that time, the French could withstand the siege for a very long time.
The blockhouse was designed by Colonel Henry Bouquet, whose signature can still be seen engraved above the doorway. The blockhouse had a special function. It was a little fort to protect the larger fort.
They had the ability, because of the rivers, to create a moat around the fort. The moat held up for a period of time, but with the environmental changes, a couple of droughts, the moat soon dried up, and Colonel Bouquet found himself in a precarious position. His main source of defense for a siege was now absent, and basically in that ditch he constructed several blockhouses, and this is one of them remaining right now. It held some 50 to 60 men. It had access to the fort from an underground tunnel, and it was quite brilliant because of the fact that if the fort walls were under siege by any large army, they would be in position to fire at their backside as well as their front side as they're advancing through. And this is set up in a fashion, the blockhouse is, so that they can fire from all angles out from it. And with 50 or 60 men, you can concentrate fire on a position of troops and defend an area pretty well.
As Pittsburgh grew and struggled with the Indians, British, and French diminished, Fort Pitt was no longer needed. The fort itself slowly disappeared as its materials were used to construct other buildings at the point. Mary Croghan Shenley, who had inherited a large amount of land in Pittsburgh from her family, gave the blockhouse to the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1894.
She realized its historical significance, I believe, and she sought out some group to possibly preserve it for a long time. The DAR became a very special interest group for this blockhouse, because once they set aside this very small plot of land that it lies upon, even though this property is within a state park and a state park within a city, they've done a very good job preserving it ever since they obtained it. The blockhouse at one time was a dwelling for living, and it was I believe it was an apartment, and they had carefully cut out a few windows and I don't believe they altered the door structure at all. This is fairly solidly built, so they couldn't do much to it but move a few bricks to make some air passages and so on. And most of the original structure, probably about 95% of it stayed intact. And I guess we were fortunate that the replacement brick was probably brick that was still on the site at the time.
Other than surviving as part of a military fortress, the blockhouse has survived the test of man and nature.
It is pretty fascinating to think about how this structure survived over the period of years that it has. Again, you not only have the worst environmental hurt is always done by mankind, and it survived that. That would be railroads and roads and bridges and so on that was constructed all around this blockhouse. You also have the natural things like floods and storms and so on. That this area is very subject to flood, and it's had several floods. And miraculously, the blockhouse has survived all these attacks. I guess from the time it was constructed, it was under attack.
And in a recent test of survival, when all of the structures at the point were cleared in the 1950s to create a state park, only the blockhouse remained. Over its 200 years plus, the blockhouse has witnessed the many changes of a dynamic city. Because the blockhouse is all that remains of the Fort Pitt buildings, it has become the symbolic landmark of Pittsburgh's past. Its earliest survival may have been due mostly to luck, but later it survived because of the dedication of those who understood its importance.
It most likely had to be some luck, but I think that when people always have a sense of history about themselves, and they seem to attach themselves to things like structures, and for some reason the blockhouse always remained.
Some landmarks accidentally become symbolic reminders of our past by surviving long enough to be appreciated. Other landmarks seem to achieve that status even before they are designed. They are bound for glory. The Allegheny County Courthouse and Jail are Pittsburgh's most magnificent buildings. The Allegheny County Courthouse is the third courthouse to serve the county. The first courthouse was located in the Diamond, the area we today call Market Square. Completed in 1800, the courthouse dominated the city skyline as it stood among the market buildings and the food stalls of the small city. As the county grew, the original courthouse was replaced in 1841. The second courthouse, designed by John Chislett, stood on Grant's Hill and was also clearly visible on the city skyline. This building served the county for 41 years, until in 1882 it was destroyed by a fire. And so it was that the county commissioners announced that they would be accepting plans for the design of a new courthouse and jail. The winner of the competition was Henry Hobson Richardson. Richardson was born in Louisiana, trained to be an architect in Paris, and opened a practice first in New York and later in Boston. By the time of the competition, he was already a well-known architect. The buildings he designed received national attention from the beginning. This drawing by Richardson shows the courthouse and jail as he designed them. Richardson was in ill health at the time of the construction of the buildings. Believing that they were his best architectural work, he said, "Let me finish Pittsburgh, and I will be content without another day." Unfortunately, he died during the construction of the buildings, and his associates completed the project based on his plans. The completed courthouse and jail, with its 310-foot tower, stood prominently over the city. This view in 1890, 2 years after the buildings were completed, shows that only the twin towers of St. Paul's Cathedral competed with the height of the courthouse tower. The courthouse and jail are Allegheny County's only architecture of international fame. The buildings are not only a local landmark, but also a National Historic Landmark, and they are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The county commissioners had requested a courtyard as part of the plans, and here in the center of the courthouse, we see many of the details that created the style, since called Richardson Romanesque. The architectural style is noted for its masonry structure at a time when the use of steel was just being introduced. The series of arches allow an abundance of light into the building's offices and courtrooms. The tall, very steeply pitched roofs add another distinctive feature to the design. The tower was designed for aesthetic reasons, but also had practical purposes. It was to be tall enough to rise above the smoky city of Pittsburgh and take in clean air, which was brought to the basement to be cooled and cleaned before being circulated throughout the building. The tower was to serve as an archive, a place to store the paperwork that the courts would produce. The stone masonry is carved in moderation, but the delicate carvings serve as a contrast to the heavily textured granite stone walls. The interior of the courthouse, also completed after Richardson's death, complements the exterior Romanesque style. The grand staircase is a series of arches that lead to the upper floors. Arches lead the eye from one level to the next. And the doors of the law library are also surrounded by Romanesque arches. The design of the exterior stone carving is repeated in the interior as well, also in moderation. Although Richardson's plans allowed for the expansion of a growing county, the population increased more than anyone could have expected, and several prominent architects designed plans which would have significantly altered the original design. Here we see a design by Henry Hornbostel in 1907, which would have placed a very large tower, a skyscraper really, in the courtyard, completely overpowering the original building. Not everyone has appreciated the Allegheny County Courthouse and jail. And the jail in particular had its critics. One rather serious threat to its preservation took place in the 1950s, when it was proposed that the jail be removed to be built elsewhere outside the city and a hotel be built on the site. A group of architects and prominent citizens fought the challenge and educated the public as to the significance of the jail and the need to keep the two buildings, both the courthouse and the jail, preserved intact together. Fortunately, the proposals to enlarge the courthouse, the suggested demolition of the jail, and other plans to significantly change Richardson's buildings did not occur. This is not to say that the courthouse has not seen change. Over its 100-plus years, it's seen a lot of change. The carved lions, called the Guardians of Justice, used to sit at street level. Grant's Hill has been lowered several times. This photo, taken in 1913, shows work being done to level Grant Street. And around the corner on Diamond Street. And on Ross Street, between the courthouse and the jail. The interiors of the buildings have been altered quite a bit over 100 years. In 1988, the Allegheny County Bicentennial Committee restored one of the courtrooms to the way it looked 100 years earlier in 1888. The chandelier was reproduced, the woodwork restored, the furniture replaced, and ceilings raised to reveal the full arched windows and the crossbeam. Even the fireplace was uncovered. Around 1890, this young girl had her picture taken near the Bridge of Sighs, the arched walkway which connects the courthouse to the jail. The picture was taken at a time when Richardson's buildings dominated the city skyline. Today, the buildings remain and are well respected for their historical and architectural significance. But now, the landmarks are surrounded by much different neighbors, modern Pittsburgh skyscrapers. While the appearance of the Allegheny County Courthouse and Jail has not changed significantly, many landmarks must change in order to survive. One of those landmarks is the Smithfield Street Bridge. Like the Allegheny County Courthouse, the Smithfield Street Bridge was a replacement to two earlier structures. The first Smithfield Street Bridge was an 8-span wooden covered bridge built in 1818. It lasted until 1845 when a fire burned down a large portion of Pittsburgh. The wooden bridge was replaced in 1846 by a wire cable suspension bridge. It was designed by John Roebling, an ingenious engineer from Saxonburg, north of Pittsburgh. This bridge rested on the same piers as the wooden bridge. By 1880, the suspension bridge could no longer meet the demands being placed upon it. And in 1883, the third and present bridge to be built at this site was completed. This Smithfield Street Bridge was designed by Gustav Lindenthal. In order for Lindenthal's bridge to survive for over 100 years, the bridge has been changed to meet the ever-increasing transportation needs of the city. Tom Reister, an engineer who will be working on the next rehabilitation of the bridge, explains some of the changes made to Lindenthal's original design.
The bridge was originally constructed with the center and west trusses only. These are the arch-type structures that you see when you're looking at the bridge from up or down the river. In 1889, they added a third truss to the bridge to provide for one additional lane of trolley traffic. However, the people who used the bridge wanted to use 2 lanes of trolley traffic on the bridge, so in 1911, the east truss was again moved a distance of 4'8", and it was moved so that 2 lanes of trolley traffic could be put on the bridge. This truss is now in the same location as it is at the present time. In 1916, the original portals, which were constructed in 1883, were completely removed, and a new portal system, the one which occurs today, was put in its place. In 1933, a major rehabilitation of the bridge was attempted. The use of the east and west roadway by 4 lanes of traffic overstressed the bridge, so there was a real necessity to lighten the loads on the bridge. So at that time, the existing or original steel floor system was completely replaced, and a new aluminum floor system was installed. This floor system was installed by, or constructed and manufactured by Alcoa, and it's one of the few and very early uses of aluminum as a roadway, in a roadway structure. There are very few instances of this in the entire United States.
Because of the geography of Pittsburgh and western Pennsylvania, bridges have always been very important to the region, and the Smithfield Street Bridge in particular has served an important role.
The Smithfield Street Bridge has survived because it's been in constant use by people since its construction. It was, in its early use, it was used to haul people from the inclines across to the city. The Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Road had a very large depot at the south juncture of the bridge. The bridge was used to haul numerous sorts of freight across the bridge. It was used to haul iron ore and steel from the steel plants on the south side of the river. Later on, it was used by trolleys to haul people across the bridge, and it's been used constantly by traffic over its entire lifetime. It's been used by buses. It's just been in constant use since its inception, and it's a very vital link between the south side of Pittsburgh and the city of Pittsburgh itself.
In a region with a multitude of bridges, the Smithfield Street Bridge has been singled out as an important landmark and is listed on the National Register. There are several reasons why the bridge was given this important designation.
It's one of the very early uses of steel in a truss, in a bridge truss. Bridges were constructed of wrought iron and wood up into the 1870s. Second major reason, it was designed by Augustus Lindenthal, and he is one of the premier bridge designers in the United States in the late 1880s and early 1900s. And I think the third reason is probably the architecture of the bridge. It has a very pleasing architecture and is much different from the rectangular shape of trusses that were constructed up to the present time.
The bridge has adapted to change many times, and a new rehabilitation of the bridge is planned.
Major rehabilitation is planned for the bridge. The plans for the rehabilitation will be prepared by Mackin Engineering Company under a contract with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. This sketch shows the portals which will be completely rehabilitated. The finials, which are located on the top of the bridge, will be replaced with the original finials that were present on the bridge. The City of Pittsburgh plaques will be repainted to match the city's colors. The lighting, which is shown here, will be replaced. The figurines, which are located on the sides of the arches, will be repaired and repainted. The figurine on this side is a coal miner, and the figurine on this side is an iron worker. In addition, the entire portal will be repainted in a stone color, and the various plaques will be repainted. This is a diagram of the floor system of the bridge. The floor system is the portion of the bridge which supports roadway traffic. The original floor system is going to be completely removed and a new floor system installed. This will enable the bridge to carry roadway traffic with a weight limit of up to 23 tons.
Some people would ask, why not just replace the bridge with a new one?
It's a vital link between the south side of Pittsburgh and the city itself. Replacement of a bridge of this type would cost in the neighborhood of $30 to $40 million. Rehabilitation of the bridge is going to cost approximately $15 million. Not only that, at this point, it's an historic landmark, and its preservation as an historic structure is very important.
As an historic landmark, the Smithfield Street Bridge is part of the heritage of Western Pennsylvania.
Construction of bridges, and most notably the Smithfield Street Bridge, is very important to the history and development of Western Pennsylvania. Due to the large number of rivers and the hills and the valleys and everything that are present in the area, bridges are an absolute necessity to the transfer of traffic and commerce across the rivers. Smithfield Street Bridge is of very important value to this area. It's the oldest steel truss bridge in the United States. It was designed by one of the premier bridge engineers of the 19th and 20th centuries. And it's really a reflection on the technical skills and the construction expertise and steelmaking expertise of residents of this area from the late 19th century.
And with the newest changes, the bridge will continue to survive as an historic landmark, as well as meet the needs of the people who use it. Close by the Smithfield Street Bridge is a group of 6 buildings which have managed to survive without all the attention and recognition which other landmarks receive. In the recent past, there's been little interest in this block of buildings bordering along Fort Pitt Boulevard. Luckily, this has changed. Today, their historical significance has been noticed. The 6 buildings, beginning with number 247, represent 6 styles of Victorian commercial architecture. They were built here on what was then called Water Street, after the Great Fire of 1845. The village of Pittsburgh first grew along the Monongahela River. The Monongahela Wharf has always been a busy place. As the city became an inland river port, the commercial wharf area grew. Steamboats lined the river's sloping wharf to load and unload freight and passengers. Freight would be loaded on wagons and hauled up to the buildings, the stores, the warehouses along Water Street. Their large entranceways that used to accommodate horses and wagons have since been closed up as the buildings were rehabilitated to meet the needs of a changing world. Today, they are used by businesses as downtown office space. Their presence reminds us of how the city looked before the days of elevators and skyscrapers. And the unpaved wharf, which used to meet the needs of steamships and wagons, now is used for automobiles and parking of a very different sort. Partly because of luck and also because they have been able to adapt to a new use, the buildings have survived. They serve as a reminder of Pittsburgh's past, and they also offer a striking contrast to newer and much taller buildings on the city skyline. While some landmarks like the Fort Pitt Commercial Row ironically survive because of neglect and lack of attention, other landmarks are preserved with love and determination. Clayton, the residence of the Henry Clay Frick family, is Pittsburgh's only remaining mansion of a nationally recognized industrialist. It recalls a time at the turn of the century when Pittsburgh was home to the men who forged the city's reputation as the workshop of the world. Joanne Moore, who is the curator of Clayton, explains why Henry C. Frick's daughter Helen preserved the building.
By her gift of Clayton to the people of Pittsburgh, Helen Clay Frick was trying to preserve one sliver of Pittsburgh's history. A time in her life when she was a child, she grew up here at Clayton, a time that was very golden. Here, her life at Clayton was very special. She had just about anything a little girl could want. She had a magnificent room that she wrote about often. She had toys and dolls and a goat cart that could pull her around throughout all of the grounds. The Mellon family were here quite often. There were presidential visits to Clayton. And it was really quite a golden time for this little girl. And I think she just wanted to preserve that one segment in her life when it was really quite grand on the estate.
George Westinghouse, H.J. Hines, and relatives and partners of Andrew Carnegie were among the neighbors of the Fricks. Today, only the Frick Mansion survives in the midst of a vastly changed neighborhood. Many of those neighboring houses and mansions which did not survive were just as grand as Clayton. Without the efforts of Helen Clay Frick, this house would probably not have survived as well.
As early as the 1950s, Helen Clay Frick was in touch and in contact with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She had plans on giving Clayton to the National Trust for their overseeing of the restoration and to open Clayton as an historic house museum. And that goes back 40, 45 years. So she was very well aware of its architectural significance. Helen Clay Frick was the preservationist. She knew that she wanted to complete this project to preserve Clayton, to preserve this segment of Pittsburgh history. She found support from other organizations such as the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She found support in her family. Ultimately, Helen Clay Frick gave Clayton to her foundation, which is managed by members of her family. And so through her family, she found a great deal of support and encouragement to preserve Clayton.
Clayton as a residence has changed significantly since the Fricks bought the home in 1882.
It was a two-story Italianate-style house. It was very lovely, and it was then known as Homewood. Originally, this property was all part of the Judge Wilkins estate that was called Homewood. Mr. Frick purchased that house, known as Homewood, in 1882 for $25,000. At that point, Mr. Frick hired Pittsburgh architect Andrew Peebles to execute about $50,000 worth of interior changes to the house, as well as building a carriage house and a greenhouse. On January 29, 1883, the family moved into Clayton, and then it was Mr. and Mrs. Frick, and they were expecting their first child. Through the course of the 1880s, the Frick family increased. By the end of the decade, there were 3 children: Childs Frick, Martha Frick, and Helen Clay Frick. Also at the end of the 1880s, Mr. Frick was now president of Carnegie Steel, and his own position had grown tremendously. He was becoming certainly known nationally and also internationally. And in 1890, he decided that it was time that his home reflect this new stature, as well as provide more room for his growing family. He selected Pittsburgh architect Frederick J. Osterling. Osterling's plan called for a massive renovation to the house. Perhaps a little too grand for Mr. Frick. He opted for a more modified version, which actually added 2 floors to the house and extended all the rooms by bays. So from an 11-room, 2-story Italianate-style house, Clayton went to a 4-story, 23-room Chateauesque style house.
With the preservation of Clayton, the public is able to see more than just the building structure itself. The interior is furnished with much of the original furniture used by the family. Each individual room was one small part of the total restoration process, completed in 1990.
This is the library at Clayton, and this is Mr. Frick's desk. It is here that Mr. Frick would have conducted any business he brought home, as well as handled any of the household management that was required of him, specifically the signing of checks. This is where all of that would have taken place. There's a safe underneath the desk that any cash were in the house would have been stored, and he also surrounds himself with some of his favorite paintings. The furnishings in here are also original to 1892. Some of them actually are original to the 1880s. Other pieces of furniture, like the library table, were made especially for this room. The artworks and all the furniture, the knickknacks that we see, the desk sets, the vases, all of these things are just how the Frick family had this room decorated. What you see is a very, very complete room, original to 1892.
The preservation and restoration of Clayton is particularly remarkable because of the completeness of the house. As a house museum, Clayton allows the public to see a piece of Pittsburgh history that represents the legacy of an internationally known industrialist.
It's just a very complete picture of one family's life in one geographic area at one particular time.
Like Henry C. Frick and the other industrialists of Pittsburgh, the workers who labored in their mills and factories worked long, hard hours in Pittsburgh, the workshop of the world.
As Clayton is the manifestation of Mr. Frick's opportunities and his industrial success, obviously this success would not have happened without his employees through the H.C. Frick Coke Company and through Carnegie Brothers Steel. Mr. Frick was certainly fortunate. He had Clayton and over 41 acres for which to enjoy a break from the heat, the dirt of the steel mills and of the downtown area. The steel workers were living close to the mills for any number of reasons. They're not only living close to the mills, but they're living close to each other. Places like Kennywood provided a tremendous opportunity to get out on Sundays, which was their only day off. As we enjoy Kennywood today as a break from our routine, so Kennywood was needed then. It served a vital purpose.
There were 13 amusement parks in southwestern Pennsylvania in the early part of this century. Kennywood is the outstanding survivor. It was developed by the Monongahela Street Railway Company beginning in 1898 as a park of picnic areas, rides, recreations of all sorts, refreshment pavilions, and flower beds along their trolley lines. By developing a park at the end of their trolley lines, the street railway companies encouraged more people to ride the trolleys on weekends and evenings. Today, the amusement park is like a house that several generations have helped furnish. The original Kennywood Casino Restaurant, from the turn of the century still greets the tired pleasure seeker looking for the best refreshments. Noah's Ark continues to be a popular amusement for people of all ages. Kennywood Park became a national landmark in 1987. As a landmark representing and documenting the history of the United States, much of the park will be preserved as it originally looked. The 1927 Racer, which has had several different looks over its 60 years, has had the design of its original facade replaced. The roller coaster capital of the world continues to give thrills to those who enjoy the wooden coaster. This refreshment stand once served as an open-air carousel building until a new building was constructed. This giant carousel, built by William Densel and Company, was brought to Kennywood in 1927. Restored in 1976, it is one of the last merry-go-rounds built with such elaborate wooden hand-carved animals and ornament. There are 4 chariots, 65 horses, a tiger, and this beautifully painted lion. The carousel, like many of the rides at Kennywood, has been enjoyed for over 60 years. While the park continues to grow and new rides and attractions are added, the older rides and historic buildings have been preserved. These landmarks give the park a familiar feeling. The old and the new blend together as changes occur slowly, and the park maintains its original feel. Like Kennywood, the landmark buildings at Station Square still remind us of a time gone by. 5 historic buildings and a railway platform and tracks help the present-day visitor to Station Square imagine the site as a thriving terminal of the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad. By the turn of this century, this little giant of a railroad had prospered and expanded along the banks of the Monongahela, crowding out iron and glass plants of an earlier date. Between 1898 and 1918, the P&LE built a magnificent terminal complex with a 700-foot balloon, train shed, an office annex, a large freight house, a huge warehouse, a powerhouse, a multitude of smaller structures, and an elaborate rail yard. The first evidence of decline from this peak of development came when the train shed was demolished in 1935. By 1960, the terminal was greatly underused, and there was talk of clearing the site for conventional business development. In 1976, however, the Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation, a nonprofit historic preservation group serving Allegheny County, went to the railroad with its vision of Station Square. Station Square would be a railroad renaissance. In 1910, thousands of people came daily to the P&LE terminal buildings to catch a train or greet a passenger. Alongside the passenger trains, freight trains carried coal, coke, iron ore, and iron and steel, both raw materials and finished products. Today, new uses have been found for 5 of the historic P&LE terminal buildings. And the industrial character of the railroad site lives on in a festive environment of shops, offices, restaurants, and entertainment. An atrium has been constructed in an old warehouse building, creating the feeling of space and bringing in light. The former warehouse now houses shops and restaurants on the ground floor and the offices above. The railroad office annex building is still used for offices. Trains used to run inside these freight buildings where they were unloaded and unloaded. The windows allowed the heat and smoke out of the buildings. Today, the windows and trusses provide a historic backdrop for modern shopping and dining. The 1901 P&LE Railroad Station served as a front door to those coming to Pittsburgh on the train. As mentioned previously, Passengers and freight were carried across the Smithfield Street Bridge to downtown Pittsburgh. Now the railroad station, an office building, has been renovated and includes a restaurant and offices. This building, listed in the National Register of Historic Places, is a landmark structure that the public enjoys, and it is the architectural centerpiece of Station Square. Like many other landmarks, the adaptive reuse of the P&LE railroad buildings serves as an example of what can be achieved when significant historical architecture and modern ingenuity are brought together. Not all buildings can be preserved. Often it's too costly to restore a building and make it comply with modern building codes, including proper heating and ventilation. The economics of bringing a building up to modern standards can be prohibitive. For this reason, as well as others, many historic landmarks are demolished. Historic preservation tries to save important pieces of our past, neighborhoods, and structures that man has designed and built, lived in, worked in, worshiped in, and played in. These physical structures from our past help us understand our history. They provide continuity from one generation to the next and offer a sense of familiarity as our environment constantly changes. Saving historic landmarks cannot be done with one person alone. It takes a public which appreciates its history and wants to preserve that history for future generations. It also takes the combined efforts of community and neighborhood organizations, private citizens, historical organizations, architects, a city's planning commission, politicians, and local, state, and national preservation organizations. Like the 7 landmark survivors we have described, Pittsburgh and its surrounding areas are full of sites which have been preserved or in need of preservation. While some of them are public monuments to the past, others are still being used. What they have in common is that they are all landmark survivors.